Whenever you're ready.
How many
But
of you here?
move a little bit farther this way. Okay, good.
How many of you here either played football like with their friends or on a team growing up, or they're a fan of the sport? They like to watch it on Sundays. Well, I never played football growing up, just besides with friends in the front yard. But I'm a big fan of the sport. I was growing up to be a diehard Steelers fan, and this has caused me to want to do research about CTE. And today I'm going to use that research to show you why it's a problem, some of the causes of it, and some of the hope for solutions. Who can get CTE? According to NPR, a famous news outlet, in July of 2017, a study revealed 177 out of 202 studied brains had CTE. These are all the different levels that were studied, including 2 people who only played at a youth level, like at a very young age, and neither of them had it. But what this shows is that basically for anybody who played above a high school level, they had a really high chance of getting CTE. Overall, the odds were about 88% chance that they would get it from playing football. So high school is the only really level where they didn't have a really good chance of getting it. And it's kind of sad that basically if you play it beyond, because some people are playing college just to help get their scholarships and get an education, that they're basically guaranteed to get CTE. Another problem with CTE is you can't really tell who's suffering. CTE isn't diagnosable until an autopsy on their brain after they die, and it can get worse over a player's career without them knowing. According to the organization ProtectTheBrain.org, which was last updated this month, CTE can cause rage, memory loss, confusion, and it often leads to suicide. This rage is a big problem because it causes people to act in a way they wouldn't normally act. And one player, in a moment of rage, he got in his car and was speeding like crazy on the highway, and he caused a wreck and killed himself and the other person. Man, these players wouldn't normally act this way, but this rage that they can get just from CTE, making them act in a different way they wouldn't, can cause harm. According to the organization ProtectTheBrain.org, last updated this month again, CTE has a growing list of victims, and it's tragic. According to the New York Times, I have these players up here all suffered from CTE. Junior Seau, he was a great football player, and he shot himself in the heart, and he left a note saying that he wanted his brain to be studied after he died. I don't have Aaron Hernandez up here. Many of you might know of him because he was a star football player very recently, and he murdered people and was in prison where he hung himself. They studied his brain, and it recently revealed that he had one of the worst cases of CTE ever found. And you can't prove if that caused him to act in the way he did, but you do know that CTE causes people to act in a way they normally wouldn't. So he might not be a good person regardless, but he might not have murdered anyone if he didn't have it. I have Terry Long up here, and he played 8 years, and he drank antifreeze to kill himself. Andre Waters, he only played in the NFL for a couple years, and his brain at the age of 44 resembled a 90-year-old with Alzheimer's. That really shows how much that CTE is hurting these people's brain, because a person double his age with a degenerative brain disease had a similar brain as him. Shane Dronette pulled a gun on his wife before eventually shooting himself, and David Dwerson texted his family that he wanted his brain to be studied, and then he killed himself shortly after. What this shows is that all these players, they are losing their minds basically as they're getting CTE worse and worse, but they feel something's wrong with them, and they want something to be done to research it because they just feel, they don't feel right. And that's what a lot of them say, is they just know that something's wrong, and they want to preserve their brain for most of them so it can be studied. That's why you have them killing themselves in ways like shooting to the heart, or hanging, or drinking antifreeze. Now, how do football players get CTE? According to Dan Seitz, a senior contributor for uprocks.com, which was last updated on September 26th, repeated blows to the head is the main cause of CTE. Up here you can see I have a normal brain compared to a brain with advanced CTE. And how a brain gets that way is basically a protein builds up in the brain through these repeated blows, and that protein is essentially degenerating the brain and causing it to take damage over time. According to the New York Times, the big hits cause damage, but the small hits do more over time. And that was last updated this month. And every football game you'll see a couple hits that are just huge blows to the head, where a player might get a concussion. but it's the small hits that happen on every play. Those of you who played football in high school, you know that the offensive and defensive linemen, their helmets just hit every play. Like that's just what happens. And it might not seem like anything crazy because they don't show symptoms and it's not hurting them in the moment. But those over time is what kind of lead up to a brain to have CTE like this. The helmets are another problem. They're not safe. They don't protect the brain, they protect the skull. What they do is they keep the skull from getting fractured or hurt every play from the big hits, which is good. But the brain shakes inside the skull, and that's what causes CTE to develop over time, because the small hits of the collisions, they don't cause anything that you can notice in the moment, but it's just when it's happening over and over again, eventually it leads to the really bad cases of CTE. Now for some of the solutions. The first easiest solution would be to improve the technology of the helmets. If they can make them so they can handle and absorb the small repetitive hits, the game of football wouldn't need to be changed any. It would just be safer. If the helmets didn't shake the brain over time, then it wouldn't be as big of a problem. This would reduce the trauma they receive over a career by a lot, even if they still get an occasional concussion or something. Because a concussion really just makes the brain more vulnerable to the next concussion. It's the small hits that do a lot over time. Another great solution would be, according to Rick Mays and author for the Washington Post, would be to get the research done, because they're currently doing research that can potentially see the progress of CTE developing instead of just seeing it afterwards. At the minimum, this would allow them to see the growth of CTE, and they could get a better understanding of it. At the best, this could allow them to get treatments for it and allow them to see it, and they could get a better understanding, knowledge over it. And the player would know that if they might have a small case of CTE, they can stop playing football and just leave the sport. Because I guarantee more players would stop at an earlier age and retire if they knew what was happening to them. But then you can also know if a player is healthy and they don't have to stop early, because a new trend in the NFL is players are retiring really early for fear. But if they might know that they're healthy, they wouldn't have to. What you all can do. You can research more if there's knowledge about CTE that you'd like to know that I didn't cover today. You can talk about the damage that CTE can do over time. If you'd help change the perceived culture of the sport, that these hits to the head are cool or they just happen. Because up until recently, they were glamorized and they were seen as the best part of it. They're only recently becoming illegal and being penalized in the game. Now, I'll show you a video that includes some of the hits to the head that have recently become illegal. But what this shows is they still happen.
Williams in the backfield. Snap it.
This play happened just a couple weeks ago, and the player was suspended for the hit, which is good because it's helping show that it's not accepted anymore. But the person still had a concussion, they were still in the hospital. What happens in a lot of these plays is you can just see the player just kind of lays down afterwards. It kind of really knocks them out. If you get hit and you break your leg, you grab for it because you're in pain, but when it's to the head, you just kind of lose it for a second. The last thing you can do is, if you have extra money, which we're college students so we really don't, but you could donate to CTE research and help the cause for finding some of these solutions. Thank you.
Awesome, great job.